Homeless woman walks into CEO's meeting begging for help. What happens next will shock you. Hey everyone, welcome back. Or if you're new here, I'm so glad you've joined us today. Before we dive into this powerful story, I just want to say thank you for being here. Your time means a lot, and I promise this story will touch your heart in ways you won't forget. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that inspires and empowers. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching me from? Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and see how far our amazing community reaches. All right, let's get started. Ava Sinclair had once been the kind of woman people turned to admire without knowing why. Grace, blooming in every movement. A soul that carried both elegance and softness like inherited silk. At 23, she was the kind of beautiful that lingered in the air. Caramel-toned skin kissed by sunlight. Long wild curls cascading over her shoulders like waves of memory. And hazel eyes that shimmered with quiet wisdom and fragile hope. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words felt like poetry written in the pauses between heartbeats. She was born into comfort. Her life woven with the fine threads of wealth, security, and adoration. Her father, Sterling Sinclair, once ruled boardrooms with confidence and charm. A man of influence whose smile opened doors and whose handshake sealed fortunes. Their estate echoed with laughter and jazz, marble floors lit by golden chandeliers, and Sunday brunches under glass ceilings. Where the light danced around her like she was meant to be worshipped. But slowly, decadence gave way to decay. Sterling fell into darkness like rain into the ocean, seamless, tragic and unnoticed at first. High-stakes poker replaced strategy meetings. Vintage scotch replaced morning espresso. And the man who once held his daughter's hand while walking her through gardens now held tumblers of whiskey that shook with regret. Ava watched him crumble, piece by piece, first with frustration, then with fear, and eventually with silent tears that soaked her pillow when the world couldn't hear. She tried to reach him, to remind him who he was, but addiction had already stolen his reflection. Night after night, strangers poured into their home, men with expensive shoes and soulless laughs. Women who wore diamonds like armor and perfume that couldn't mask the emptiness. Ava stopped going downstairs. She stopped dressing up. She began to fade from the rooms that once celebrated her. And then came the night that tore her life from under her feet. It started like the others, dim lights, the scent of cigars, the echo of bluff and bravado. But this time the stakes were higher. Sterling had already lost 5 consecutive games, each more brutal than the last. Billions slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. His opponent, Marcus Vellon, leaned back in his chair, sipping aged bourbon, eyes glinting with something far more dangerous than greed, control. He grinned, laid down a card, and with a voice dipped in venom, made a final offer. Your daughter, Sinclair. One last hand. Win her back or hand her over. Time stopped. The room fell silent. Ava, watching from the top of the staircase with wide, trembling eyes, felt her body freeze as if reality had turned to ice. Her father's face blanched. His mouth opened, but no words came. Seconds passed. A refusal hovered in the air, but it never landed. Desperation whispered cruel things into his soul. And after a long, tormented pause, Sterling nodded. Ava's breath shattered. Her heart didn't beat. It broke. She ran, barefoot, down the stairs, shouting, pleading, disbelieving. You can't. I'm your daughter, not your debt. But Sterling couldn't look her in the eyes. He simply turned away, placing his trembling hands on the table, praying for a win that didn't come. The 6th game was lost before the cards were dealt. Marcus stood slowly, triumphant, his hand already reaching toward the girl whose future had been gambled away like spare change. Ava screamed, fought, cried, but her strength couldn't bend the will of 2 powerful men corrupted by obsession, one by addiction, the other by desire. She was dragged from the house that once held her baby pictures, her birthday cakes, her first piano recital, her wrists bruised from resisting, her voice hoarse from begging, but no one came to help. Her neighbors stayed behind curtains. Her father sat with his head in his hands, too ashamed to speak. That night, the stars disappeared for Ava. The sky above seemed as empty as the promises she was raised on. She was no longer a daughter or a dreamer, just a debt paid in flesh. The car doors locked behind her with a final click that sounded like a prison gate. And as the mansion faded in the rearview mirror, so did every piece of the girl who once believed she was safe. The world had taken her innocence in one brutal, unforgettable hand, and the man she called father had folded. The heavy mansion doors closed behind Ava, with a finality that echoed like thunder through her soul. Marcus Vellen's estate was a monument of wealth, built on rot, a hollow palace, dressed in silk and silence. Every polished surface, every ornate chandelier, every marble floor was a cruel reminder that she was no longer free, no longer seen as a daughter or even a human being, but a prize claimed by deceit. The grand hall smelled of cold stone and danger. Ava's wrists were still raw from the struggle, her breath still caught in shallow waves, her heart pounding against the bars of a new reality she had never imagined. The room she was taken to had no windows, no clocks, only velvet drapes and gold-framed, mirrors that reflected a version of herself she barely recognized wide. Tear-swollen eyes, cracked lips, a trembling girl wrapped in silence and disbelief. She was tied with ropes at the ankles and wrists, not tightly enough to leave lasting scars, but enough to remind her that choice was no longer hers. Marcus would come in at night like a shadow pretending to be a man, dressed in tailored suits and false tenderness. He would bring wine she never drank, speak her name like it was a luxury he owned, whisper lullabies laced with control. His fingers would trace the curve of her arm, while she clenched, her jaw turned to stone, retreating into the furthest corners of her mind. There was no love in his touch, only performance. He played affection like a role, practiced kisses on her forehead that felt more like claims staked than comfort given. She stared past him into the silence, into the spaces where her mother's lullabies used to live, where sunlight used to pour through bedroom curtains and fill her with peace. Now the only light came from the hallway outside the door when he left it cracked, as if teasing her with glimpses of escape she could never reach. Food was delivered on silver trays, untouched and growing cold, because fear ate more than hunger ever could. She counted hours by the shadows, mapped her breaths to the rhythm of her heartbreak. Sometimes she spoke aloud, just to hear her voice and remind herself she still existed. You are not what he says you are. You are not his. It became a chant, a thread of defiance in a tapestry of helplessness. One evening, Marcus brought her a silk dress and said they were dining together like old friends. Ava refused to wear it. He smiled, calm, controlled, cruel, and said softly, "You'll come around." Beautiful things always do. She wanted to scream, to throw the dress in his face, but her body was tired, and her will worn thin from days that bled into each other. She sat on the edge of the bed that was too soft to offer comfort, holding the dress like it was made of fire, burning with humiliation. The silence between his visits was louder than his voice. Each hour without noise was heavy with dread. What would he do next? Would he escalate? Would he break the last threads of her spirit? But Ava clung to something deeper than hope, dignity. Even bound, she refused to be broken. In the quiet moments, she remembered her mother's laughter, her own dreams of teaching, of travel, of falling in love under streetlights in Paris. She whispered her future-like prayers. I will be free. I will survive. Someone will see me. Her strength lived in the refusal to surrender her soul, even when her body had been taken. Marcus never struck her, never screamed, never left visible wounds. But control can be more brutal when it comes in silk gloves and soft words. She began to notice patterns. When he arrived, how long he stayed, which key jingled in which lock. Small details became weapons of preparation. She examined the windowless walls for weaknesses, the door for delays in locking, his footsteps for hesitation. Somewhere inside her, the ember of escape began to flicker. She was not a woman who would die quietly in silk sheets, but the nights were long and the moments of weakness many. Sometimes she wept into the pillows, shaking with a grief so profound it felt like drowning. She mourned the version of herself that had danced barefoot in the rain, who sang out of tune, who believed people were good, that Ava had been stolen, pawned off like an object, betrayed by the man who once told her bedtime stories. Still, even in those moments, she refused to let the shame become her identity. She was more than what had been done to her. Somewhere out there, the world still turned. The stars still blinked, and she believed, had to believe, that someone would walk into this nightmare and pull her out. Not as a victim, but as a woman worth rescuing. Her silence was not surrender. It was strategy. She was waiting, watching, surviving. And though Marcus thought he had crushed her beneath velvet and rope, he had underestimated the quiet rage building in the heart of a girl who had already lost everything, except the will to rise again. The sky wept that evening, as if it too could no longer bear the weight of Ava's suffering, thick, cold drops drumming against the roof like a battle cry from the heavens. Lightning flashed in jagged streaks across the night, illuminating the mansion that had become her prison, casting long shadows on the walls that had memorized her fear. Marcus had left hours earlier, wrapped in arrogance and liquor, muttering something about a yacht, party and disappearing. Into the storm, with his usual trail of silence and perfume, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding against her ribs like a prisoner shaking the bars. She had watched him leave, memorized the lull between footsteps, the delay in locking the outer hallway door, the faint creak in the servants' passage just beyond the wall. Tonight was different. Tonight felt like a whisper from the universe daring her to move. She slipped the ropes with the skill she'd honed through nights of quiet resistance. Her wrists now marked with the reddish tattoos of captivity. Every sound became a threat, the groan of the floorboards, the whistle of wind through narrow cracks, the beating of her heart so loud it nearly gave her away. She crept barefoot across the marble floors, the cold biting into her soles as though warning her that freedom would cost her blood. Her fingers trembled as she unlatched the side door. Marcus never thought she'd find the lock, ancient and stubborn, but mercifully giving in after one breathless twist. And then she ran, into the storm, into the screaming wind, into a world that had once betrayed her but now offered the smallest sliver of salvation. Rain lashed her skin like punishment and blessing all at once, soaking her thin nightgown until it clung to her like desperation. Her curls matted to her scalp, her breath came in ragged bursts, and still she ran, through unfamiliar streets, past cars that didn't stop, past eyes that saw a drenched girl, but not the storm inside her. Each step sent shocks of pain through her legs, but the agony was nothing compared to what she left behind. The city blurred around her, a chaos of lights and noise, but Ava had no destination. She only knew she could not stop. Her knees buckled more than once. Her arms scraped from brushing alley walls, but the thought of Marcus finding her again was enough to drive her forward like a hunted animal refusing to die. She whispered names to herself, her mother, her younger self, versions of Ava who still dreamed, still loved, still trusted. They were her fuel. She darted across the street without looking, horns blaring behind her, headlights flashing like alarms in the dark. Her vision was fading, a haze of fear and exhaustion wrapping around her brain like smoke. Then ahead, a towering glass building, luminous and dignified against the night, its gold letters gleaming. Above the revolving doors, like the gates of a new world, Griffin Holdings. She didn't think. Her body moved before her mind could form the words. She stumbled across the threshold. The warmth of the lobby, a shocking contrast to the cold fury outside. A security guard shouted something, but she couldn't hear him. Her knees collapsed under her, her hands reaching out blindly. Water pooled beneath her like an offering, her hair clinging to her cheeks as she gasped for air. Behind glass doors, just beyond the lobby, a boardroom was full of suited men and women, seated around a polished table. At its head was a man with sharp eyes and an aura of command. Mid-sentence, when he turned toward the sound, silence fell in the boardroom as eyes turned to the drenched girl trembling on the marble floor. Ava lifted her head, her lips quivering, her voice barely more than a cracked whisper. "Please, help me!" The security guard reached for his radio, but the man at the head of the boardroom table stood slowly, ignoring the murmurs around him, his gaze locked on the broken figure at the door. He didn't see a stranger. He saw someone who had been through war, someone who needed not just shelter but safety. Ava tried to rise, but her legs gave out again. Her entire body ached, her vision flickered, and then darkness. Her world slipped away as voices shouted and footsteps rushed toward her. She didn't know who caught her before she hit the floor, whose hands wrapped around her shoulders, whose voice called her name, though she had never told it. But in that moment, as unconsciousness pulled her under, she felt something she hadn't known in a long time, a hint of safety, of arms that didn't harm, of warmth that didn't steal. And though the storm still raged outside, inside those glass walls, Ava had crossed a line from captivity to possibility. The escape had cost her everything, but in that instant, she wasn't a possession anymore. She was a survivor. Julian Cross had never been a man easily shaken. As CEO of Griffin Holdings, he had weathered boardroom wars, corporate betrayals, and global crises with the calm precision of a strategist who always stayed 10 steps ahead. But nothing prepared him for the sight of a rain-drenched girl. Collapsing in the heart of his empire, the glass doors had barely swung open before he was on his feet. The tension in the room forgotten as instinct took over. His voice cut through the stunned murmurs of the boardroom. "Everyone, out now!" No one dared question him. He moved faster than anyone expected, his polished shoes echoing across the marble as he reached the trembling form of the girl, no, the young woman, whose whisper still hung in the air like a plea. Suspended in time, "Please help me." Her face was a canvas of exhaustion and fear, eyes wide and wet, lips trembling as if each word cost her breath. He dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation, shrugging off his coat and wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. The moment their eyes met, something stirred in him, a jolt not of attraction but of recognition, like he was witnessing a soul shattered yet still burning. "You're safe now," he said softly, voice low, meant only for her. "You're safe." Her body leaned into him for balance, as if gravity no longer trusted her to stand. He helped her to a nearby couch, signaling for security to hold off, for assistance to stay back. This wasn't a PR incident. This was something else, something human. As he gently pressed a warm towel into her hands, she began to speak haltingly, her voice fractured by sobs and silence. "My name, Ava Sinclair," she began, her words swimming through tears. My father. He lost everything, and then he lost me." Julian's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, letting her pour the nightmare out. Between trembling breaths and shaking fingers, she told him about the mansion, the ropes, the nights of forced silence, the escape through the rain. Her voice broke when she spoke of Marcus. Julian's jaw clenched, but his eyes never left hers. He didn't offer hollow comfort. He offered presence, and presence for Ava was everything. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "I ran until my body gave out." She looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry I ruined your meeting." Julian let out a breath, not of frustration, but something closer to awe. "You didn't ruin anything," he said, voice quiet but firm. "You walked into the right room." The room had grown still around them, time slowing as the storm outside faded into a hush. He handed her a bottle of water. She took it hesitantly. "No one's ever listened before," she said. "Not like this." "That's because they didn't see you," he replied. "But I do." Her lips quivered, and for a moment she looked away, hiding the tears slipping down her face. Julian stood, signaling his assistant quietly before returning his focus to Ava. "You need rest, clothes, food, and safety." She looked up at him, startled. "Why are you helping me?" His reply came without pause. "Because you asked, and because you shouldn't have had to." That night he cleared his schedule, gave orders for her to be taken to the company's executive suite upstairs. secure, private and warm. Her doctor was called, a counselor too, but only when she was ready. As she lay under clean sheets hours later, dressed in borrowed clothes far too big, but infinitely more dignified than what she'd worn, Ava stared at the ceiling, her mind still racing. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain, beneath the memory of cold ropes and colder hands, something else took root: trust. She wasn't healed, not yet, but someone had seen her not as a victim, not as a broken girl, but as a person worth listening to. A door had opened, not just to a building, but to light. And for the first time in a long time, Ava let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had been saved, not only from the darkness, but for something more. The following morning, sunlight broke through the skyline like a soft promise, illuminating the city with gold. But for Ava, waking in the penthouse suite, wrapped in clean sheets and unfamiliar calm, light still felt like something she had to earn. Her body ached in quiet places, but it was the silence, the safety that left her breathless. Julian had left a note by her bedside in neat, focused handwriting. "Take your time. You're not alone anymore." It wasn't just a message, it was a vow. Later that day, after ensuring she'd eaten and rested, Julian sat across from her in his private office. No desk between them, no pressure in his tone. "I want to talk to you about your future," he said gently. "But first, let's deal with your past." Ava flinched, her hands tightening around the warm teacup he'd handed her, but Julian met her with steady eyes. "I've already contacted my most trusted legal advisor," he continued. "Her name is Naomi Reeve. She's brilliant, relentless, and she's on her way here now." Ava blinked, confused. "You did that for me?" "No," he replied. "I did it with you. We fight this together." When Naomi arrived, sleek, assertive, and radiating empathy, she listened to Ava with compassion wrapped in legal focus. In less than 48 hours, restraining orders were filed, guardianship was granted, and charges against Marcus were pursued with the force of Julian's legal arsenal behind them. The man who once caged her now found himself hunted by the system he thought he controlled. Ava watched it unfold like an out-of-body experience, both terrifying and freeing. But Julian didn't treat her like a fragile porcelain piece. He gave her options, asked her opinion, made her feel part of the process. "You don't need permission to be strong," he said one evening as they reviewed the case timeline in his office. "It was always in you." Days turned into a week. The press began to catch whispers, but Julian shielded her name. Ava, for the first time, walked through the Griffin Holdings corridors, not as a shadow, but as a survivor reclaiming her place in the world. Julian approached her with an offer, not of pity, but of purpose. "You have a keen mind," he said, handing her a thick file. "I've seen it in the way you listen, the way you speak. I need someone I can trust as my executive assistant. Not out of charity, Ava, because you're the best candidate." She hesitated, heart pounding. "I don't even have a resume," he smiled. "Then we'll make one together." With trembling hands and a spark of hope, Ava said yes. The first day she stepped into Julian's office not as a guest, but as staff. She wore a modest suit borrowed from the company wardrobe, shoulders square, curls loose and proud, eyes steadier than they'd been in weeks. Staff were polite, but Julian's respect for her sent a ripple through the company. Culture. Ava was not to be underestimated. Within days, she proved herself, organizing high-level meetings, coordinating schedules with tact and grace, and earning trust not through her story but her skill. She moved like someone learning how to breathe again. Each step forward a quiet triumph. Julian never hovered, but he always noticed. One late night as they wrapped up back-to-back presentations, he caught her laughing, freely for the first time. "That sound," he said softly, not looking up from his screen, "is better than any quarterly gain." She blushed, biting her lip. "I didn't think I could ever feel normal again." He glanced at her, serious now. "You're not normal, Ava, you're exceptional." The words settled deep inside her, stronger than the echoes of Marcus's cruelty. louder than her father's betrayal. She still had nightmares. She still flinched at unexpected sounds, but she was no longer silent. She was rebuilding, not as the version of herself before the trauma, but as someone. New, empowered, purposeful, unbreakable. Julian had opened a door. But it was Ava who walked through it, choosing to rise. Days at Griffin Holdings had begun to blend into something Ava had never dared to imagine, a rhythm that felt like healing in motion. Working alongside Julian Cross was more than just a job. It was a journey into trust and rediscovery, a slow unwrapping of a heart that had been tightly guarded for far too long. Their interactions started with professional nods and polite exchanges, but over time, the walls between them softened, revealing moments of warmth that neither had expected. Coffee breaks became small islands of calm in the chaos of meetings and deadlines, where Julian would watch Ava with quiet admiration as she carefully prepared her drink, adding just the right amount of cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon, a habit she confessed came from her mother. Their conversations drifted from work to stories of childhood dreams, favorite books, and shared love for late-night jazz music. Sometimes, after a long day, they'd find themselves huddled over blueprints or project files in the dim light of the office, the city's glow casting gentle patterns across the walls. Ava's laughter, soft, genuine, and free, began to echo through the rooms, weaving a new melody into Julian's carefully ordered life. He saw in her something rare, resilience wrapped in humility, courage folded with kindness, and a spark of light that refused to be extinguished. And Ava, for the first time since those dark days, felt something she hadn't known in years: safety. Not just the absence of fear, but the presence of someone who understood her pain without judgment, who met her strength with equal strength, who held space for her vulnerability without trying to fix it. One evening, after a particularly grueling board meeting that stretched long into the night, Julian suggested they take a break in the small lounge overlooking the city skyline. The soft hum of distant traffic mixed with the gentle clink of coffee cups. As they settled into plush chairs, the quiet between them stretching comfortably, Julian's usual reserve melted away as he turned to Ava, his voice lower, more intimate. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," he said, eyes searching hers for a flicker of understanding. Ava's breath hitched, the words settling deep in her chest like a balm. "And I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession was delicate, a tender offering rather than a demand. Ava didn't speak. There were no words big enough, no sudden revelation that could capture what stirred within her. Instead, she rose, every movement slow and deliberate, and stepped closer, her heartbeat sinking with his. She laid her head gently against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had chosen her, that offered her refuge. Julian's arms circled around her with a softness that belied his strength, pulling her into a hug that whispered promises of protection and belonging. His lips brushed her forehead in a kiss, full of reverence and care, a silent vow that she was treasured, that her scars were not marks of shame, but badges of survival. In that quiet moment, wrapped in the glow of office lamps and the city's distant pulse, Ava let herself surrender to something new, a love that wasn't born from rescue, but from respect, a love that healed rather than hurt, a love that promised not just a future but a home. And for the first time since everything shattered, Ava's heart felt whole again, beating in time with a man who saw her, not as broken, but as beautiful and brave beyond measure. The air was soft that evening, carrying a delicate fragrance of blooming white roses as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the garden where Julian had carefully prepared a moment meant to last forever. The soft strains of a piano whispered through the breeze, mingling with the rustle of leaves, creating a sanctuary of calm and beauty away from the relentless pace of the world. Julian stood before Ava, whose eyes shimmered with a mix of wonder, gratitude, and the fierce strength that had carried her through darkness into light. His voice, steady yet full of tenderness, broke the silence. "Ava, from the moment you stepped into my life, you have shown me what true courage looks like. I don't want to rescue you, because you're no one's damsel in distress. I want to stand beside you forever." The words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, stirring emotions she had long buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. Tears welled in Ava's eyes, not of sorrow but of triumph, as she met Julian's gaze with a clarity born from battles fought and won. "Yes," she whispered, her voice both fragile and fierce, "I will." The promise wasn't just about marriage. It was about partnership, equality and shared dreams. Their wedding was intimate, held in that same garden, where love had been spoken into existence, witnessed only by those who had stood by them through every trial. And triumph, close friends, family who had embraced Ava's rebirth, and a few trusted colleagues who understood the journey behind the celebration. Ava wore a gown that reflected her essence, simple yet radiant, flowing like the new life she had embraced. Her hair, natural and free, caught the soft breeze, and her smile was a beacon of hope that shone brighter than any diamond. Julian looked at her with reverence, the vows exchanged carrying the weight of genuine commitment, not just words. "I vow to honor you, to respect your strength, to nurture the woman you are and the woman you will become. And I vow to walk beside you, to speak my truth with you, and to build a future where we both rise." As they sealed their promises with a gentle kiss, the garden seemed to bloom brighter, as if nature itself celebrated their union. But Ava's story did not end at love's doorstep. It was only the beginning. With Julian's unwavering support, she founded a charitable organization dedicated to empowering women who had suffered abuse and hardship, offering them not only shelter but education, counseling, and a platform to reclaim their voices. Her foundation became a beacon of hope, a testament to her belief that trauma could be transformed into strength and pain into purpose. Ava stood tall, not as a victim, but as a leader whose grace and resilience inspired countless others to find their own new dawn. She often reflected on the path that had brought her here, the broken nights, the cold chains, the desperate flight, and knew that every step, however painful, had led her to this radiant moment of triumph. In Julian's arms, in the garden filled with white roses, Ava Sinclair was no longer defined by her past, but by the promise of all that lay ahead. Together they faced the horizon, not as two who saved each other, but as partners ready to build a life filled with love, justice, and unshakable hope.